It was symptomatic of a broader societal ailment that wasn't just affecting Tampa, Florida, but the nation. Let's arrest a few Italians, let's pretend to jail them. In fact, let's lynch them afterwards so we can spread the panic by means of terror. Hi, I'm Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel where we talk about American identity and family stories. If you're new to the channel, I start with my own family story, which comes from all over the world. And really looking at the experience also of immigrants coming to the United States, because I think we've been sold a bill of goods that you can be white or you can be black. And the experience of immigrants coming into the U.S., some having to sue for the right to be white and naturalized, which we've covered on this channel too, it just goes to show that truly things are not black and white. And I have done a plethora of videos on the Southern Italian Sicilian experience, in part because my dad's grandparents came from what is now Italy. I've covered a couple of these lynching videos, and what I want to say as someone who also has ancestors who were enslaved African Americans in Louisiana, this is in no way to dismiss the insane, atrocious, horrific treatment and lynchings and brutality against people of color in the South. But it's to kind of underscore it by saying, look, we really don't know our own history. We all should care about this history, and in part because for many of us, this is the history of our communities that we didn't know about. I was raised in New York, like a good Italian American, and like many New Yorkers, we are drawn to Florida. It's like a moth to the flame. All three of my brothers, I think, are in Florida now. And one of them lives just outside of Naples. And Naples, Florida is fascinating because I was in an Italian restaurant with my family a couple weeks ago, La Trattoria, which is amazing. But people around me were speaking in Italian. And I was like, I'm used to hearing Spanish. I live in Nashville. That's much more frequent. And I was like, I'm hearing Italian. And it was really cool. It was really surprising. And so it was especially surprising to me to see how a really chilling event in Tampa, Florida's history is connected to the lynching of Italian immigrants. In 1910, Tampa was shaken by an incident. A mob lynched 2 Italian immigrants. And it occurred in the wake of other lynchings of Italians, especially the mass lynching in 1891 in New Orleans. This event had already driven many Italians to seek safer havens. So Tampa had a growing Italian community in Ybor City. Tampa is also called Cigar City. Its nickname hints at the bustling cigar factories that once defined this place. So back in 1910, tensions were super high, especially because of a labor strike that had dragged on through the scorching Florida summer. Angelo Albano and Castange Ficarrada, 2 men who were caught up in this chaos, were not just random targets, though. But their tragic story isn't just a tale of 2 individuals meeting a brutal end. It's a window into the complexities of American identity and the struggles of immigrant communities and the harsh realities of racial and labor dynamics at the time. And I want to underscore this, that we're not just looking at a racial issue, but it is combined with labor dynamics.
But you start to follow the money.
How did the local media portray the immigrants? Were they scapegoats for deeper societal issues? And how did the Italian American community herself respond to such egregious violations of justice? This wasn't just a matter of mob violence. It highlighted how immigrant communities, particularly those from Southern Europe, were viewed with suspicion, even hostility, and these communities were navigating a precarious balance of trying to assimilate, become American, change your name, don't teach your kids the dialect that you brought over from Italy. What did it mean for pursuing the American dream and becoming American? Now, I'm going to read from a paper from an incredible professor. Actually, I invited him on. He said yes. I'm so excited. His name is Stefano Lucconi. He wrote a really great book that I'm going to bring him on to talk about. It talks about Italians in Philadelphia becoming like white ethnics. And what does that mean? But he wrote this incredible paper, a journal, about the lynching in Tampa. So I thank him for his work, and I am looking forward to speaking to him. So what led to such a brutal act? Well, in 1910, there was a climate of growing labor unrest, and 2 Italian immigrants were accused of being involved in a fatal shooting. The response wasn't a trial or a call for justice through legal means. Instead, it was mob violence, a lynching that highlighted deep-seated prejudices and fears within the community. It was symptomatic of a broader societal ailment that wasn't just affecting Tampa, Florida, but the nation. Angelo Albano and Costenge Ficarrada were part of this Italian-American community in Ybor City, which is it's a little area in Tampa. Their involvement in labor organizing was actually in response to just the terrible conditions that many immigrants faced in factories and many non-immigrants. I mean, during this time, the labor movement and what was going on there. And so they were known within their community, not just for their work, but for their advocacy for fair labor practices. Tampa was in turmoil in 1910, and not just ethnic turmoil. In June of 1910, Tampa was thrust into chaos as one of the most tumultuous labor disputes unfolded. The strike was spearheaded by the Cigar Makers International Union, and it saw a dozen factories grinding to a halt over the next 5 months. So this period was marked by a violent struggle for control over the profitable cigar industry, involving several shootings, beatings, deportations. Workers clashed fiercely with manufacturers and the city's business elite. And so this is not just an isolated incident. This is a landscape that we're now stepping into. Amidst this backdrop of unrest, a tragic incident occurred on September 14th. Mr. Easterling, the bookkeeper at West Tampa's Busillo Brothers factory, was fatally shot. He lived, and then he later succumbed to his injuries at the hospital a few days later. In a swift response fueled by vengeance, on September 21st, Ficarrada and Albano, 2 prominent labor organizers, were arrested under charges of murder. The stereotypes against Italian immigrants were often stereotyped as anarchists and criminals. Scaglione did a great piece on this, and he wrote that, quote, 6 days later, in July, at the Bustillo Brothers and Diaz factory, the union organizing committee confronted the firm's bookkeeper, Easterling. Angered by their impertinence, Easterling pulled a gun and fired once at a committee member, barely missing. This action made the bookkeeper a main target of union radicals. So here we can see that this was not just a random attack against Easterling. This man pulled a gun and fired at one of the committee union members. By the evening, the situation escalated dramatically. A mob overpowered the police escorting them, and the following morning, the community awoke to a grim scene. Both men were found dead, hanging from a tree along what is now known as Kennedy Boulevard. The allegations linking Ficarrada and Albano to Easterling's shooting were never substantiated. And tragically, no one was held accountable for the lynching of these 2 men either. Edward Lambright, recounting the horror of that morning, noted the community's shock as people stumbled upon the gruesome scene. The Tribune later rationalized the lynching, suggested it delivered, quote, a verdict that the people of the city will not tolerate the business of assassination for hire. Easterling, who was initially recovering, succumbed to complications from his injury on September 28th, further inflaming the community. So these men were lynched before Easterling, he was still alive. It is obvious, as we delve into the details, that this is no ordinary crime. The mob didn't just kill them. They made a spectacle of it. And again, just to highlight, this is not to compare the absolute brutality of lynching of Black Americans in the South, or all over the country. But this gruesome display was meant to send a chilling message. And we have to ask, well, who is the message to? According to Professor Luconi, quote, a notice was pinned to Albano's belt, this saying after he was hanged, written in black ink, and it read, beware, others take note or go the same way. We know 7 more. We are watching you. If any more citizens are molested, look out. Justice. Now, what's striking in Professor Luconi's paper is he recounts the response of the press and the public. The Tampa Morning Tribune rationalized the Bob's actions, claiming, quote, the conclusion is irresistible that they were acting as agents of a certain element of the strikers in an attempt to end the life of Mr. Easterling. This attempt to justify the lynching underscores this entanglement of these ethnic and racial prejudices and these economic fears, where immigrants were often viewed as threats to economic stability and social order. And again, I have to go back to this reality that in Florida, there are a lot of Italian Americans there. In no way are these Italian Americans viewed as threats to the economic stability and order of Florida. But were Albano and Ficarrata really what the newspapers claimed? Luconi pointed out a significant knowledge gap here, that the actual circumstances of the alleged crime remain shrouded in mystery and assumptions rather than factual clarity. So this ambiguity leaves us questioning whether other motives at play, perhaps related to labor strikes and the tensions they caused in the community. The mainstream press, especially the Tampa Morning Tribune, had a tendency to sensationalize and exaggerate criminal backgrounds of the victims. For instance, they accused Ficarrata of murdering a relative who was a former mayor, and they painted Albano as a fugitive involved in violent conspiracies. The Tampa Morning Tribune branded them as, quote, tools of anarchists, which obviously is going to terrify everybody in the community. However, it's crucial to note that these reports didn't always align with reality. So Ficarrata was acquitted from the previous trial, and Albano, who had arrived in New Orleans as a child, well after the crimes that he was alleged to have committed, he couldn't have committed. Those happened before he even showed up to New Orleans as a child. There's a serious discrepancy here between the allegations and the facts. So this kind of media coverage, which we talk about often, the media coverage, it not only shapes the public perception, but played a role in justifying violent acts. I will underscore this all day long. The power of the media in influencing us, influencing public sentiment, and outcomes in judicial processes. Professor Luconi also quoted from an Italian-American newspaper of the time, one that stated, quote, let's arrest a few Italians, let's pretend to jail them. In fact, let's lynch them afterwards, and then let's threaten their surviving lot so that we can spread the panic and win the match by means of terror. You know, how did this lynching influence the Italian-American community? Did it catalyze more rigorous defense mechanisms within immigrant communities, or did it deepen the assimilationist impulse? You know, many people have shared in comments on other videos, you know, their grandparents, their parents spoke Italian or Sicilian or an Italian dialect, and it wasn't passed on. This is not just to sit and recount history. This is to engage with it, to question it, to learn from it, and ultimately to apply it to how we behave tomorrow. Because if we don't apply and change how we behave tomorrow as a nation, as a community, as a neighborhood, then we've learned nothing, right? And history doesn't exist just to sit in it and always be looking backward, but it's to look backward so that we can look forward with purpose and power.